So Boris Johnson has twice asked for a general election before, and twice he hasn't got one. Now, will it be third time lucky? Today, the Prime Minister declared he wants a snap general election on December the 12th. And as ever, he's put the onus on Parliament, telling MPs they will get, quotes, all the time they want to debate his Brexit deal, as long as they agree to the election. Indications so far from the opposition parties suggest it might not go Mr. Johnson's way. Our first report tonight, here's our political correspondent, Liz Bates.
Prime Minister, are we heading for a general election?
Boris Johnson left Downing Street today ready to present MPs with a new Brexit offer. Agree to a December general election in return for more time to pass a Brexit deal in the Commons.
The way to get Brexit done is, I think, to be reasonable with Parliament and say if they genuinely want more time to study this excellent deal, they can have it, but they have to agree to a general election on December the 12th.
The details were set out in a letter to Jeremy Corbyn. He told the Labour leader he expects EU leaders to offer a Brexit extension until the 31st of January. If that happens, the Commons will vote next week on whether to have a general election on the 12th of December. This will give MPs until November 6th to pass a Brexit deal in the Commons. The Prime Minister wrote, "This means we could get Brexit done before the election on the 12th of December, if MPs choose to do so." This is the moment the Leader of the House delivered the news to MPs.
Members will have an opportunity to debate and approve a motion relating to an early parliamentary general election.
A straightforward offer, but a less than straightforward response from Labour, who had some demands of their own.
Her Majesty's opposition Labour Party will back an election once no deal is ruled out. Wait for it if the extension allows.
Yes. Jeremy Corbyn's response was to stand up and leave the chamber.
We know why they won't have an election. It's because they're afraid of the voters. So alienated are the voters, so feeling disenfranchised are they with their socialist friends that the socialists are running away from an election.
We will not be pushed today by this Prime Minister, because he might be hoping the electorate will fall for his contracts, but the SNP most certainly will not.
What I make of it is that we've got someone who is trying to distract desperately from his own failure to keep his promise of getting Brexit done, do or die, by the 31st of October.
The government will need the support of 2/3 of MPs to get the general election they want. But given today's reaction, the outlook seems gloomy. With hopes of a Brexit breakthrough fading, the Prime Minister returned to Downing Street tonight. He's opened the door to a way forward, but can he persuade others to follow him?
Now, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me. Gary, where's Labour tonight?
Very good question. I know where virtually every single Labour MP is because I spent the last couple of hours trying to stop them and talk to them. I didn't find a single one who wanted the Labour Party to sign up to this idea of an early election, a sort of twofer deal. You get to have a time-limited look at the bill and then an early election. Couldn't find a single Labour MP or Labour figure who wanted to sign up to this, but that's probably because the few people who retained an open mind on it and were still chewing over it were in the leader's office. And I think we're probably about to hear from the leader, I suspect, and I suspect he's going to say he's not going to go for the deal, but it has been a very sweaty 2 hours for some Labour MPs who are absolutely shocked that Jeremy Corbyn or anyone around him should think of going near this. But at the end of the day, they're not going to do that, and that leaves a giant question mark over what it is that the government's going to do next.
Well, why is the government even doing this?
Well, the government does have splits in its own ranks, around the cabinet table and elsewhere. People who have looked at the progress of this bill at second reading have thought, look, we've really got to give this a go. We might just be able to hold together a majority and actually get the withdrawal agreement into law and Brexit. But it would be beyond the 31st of October date, even if it were to happen. And so this is, to an element, a bit of displacement activity or chaff by number 10, who don't want too much focus on that sort of split-screen moment on 31st of October when you see Boris Johnson saying this will happen, die in a ditch, do or die, and then the dates sort of drift by. So they're very concerned about that. I think it also plays into their longer-term election strategy for whenever the election happens, because it builds up anti-parliament feeling. But what does it mean about the bill itself? If they lose on Monday, and you have to say now it looks like pretty much a racing certainty, what do they do next? At the moment, they're kind of saying that bill, the withdrawal agreement bill, you can't have it, you can't look at it, it's my homework. They're not going to share it with Parliament and let Parliament have a go at it. Parliament might pass it, it might amend it beyond recognition, but they're not going to let them touch it. So the great question, I think, tonight and over the weekend is that, but also what kind of extension will the EU offer and when will they offer it? The great expectation has been that they're going to say the 31st of January and you can stay in the EU until then. That's the date that was in the letter that the Prime Minister was forced to send. But at the moment, I think there's a strange sort of dance going on. They're waiting to see what happens here before they give anything definitive. And you have to say there aren't very definitive signals coming out of this building, as ever.
Gary Gibbon. Well, so will Mr Johnson get opposition parties to support him this time? Earlier I spoke to Ian Blackford, the Scottish National Party's leader here in the House of Commons. I asked him how he greeted the news that Boris Johnson wants to call an election for the 12th of December.
It's mad. I mean, we want to make sure we've got the extension and we want an election as quickly as possible. The idea that we're asking people to go to the polls days before Christmas, and the Prime Minister wants to have his cake and eat it. He wants to have the withdrawal agreement bill go through Parliament, then have the election. He's got this the wrong way around. What we should be doing is letting the people have their say, and then Parliament reacts to the vote of the people in the general election. This is barking mad. It is something that will not find support anywhere in the House of Commons.
Your constituency is around Inverness. What's it like December the 12th?
Well, it's pretty dark, I'll tell you that. I mean, you're talking about you're getting close to the shortest day. It doesn't get light till 9 in the morning. It's getting dark, 3:30, 4 o'clock. Many communities have no street lights. People are not going to thank you for asking them to come out and vote in a general election when we're in the middle of winter.
So let's get this straight. What does the SNP think is the right way forward at this moment?
The right way forward is to make sure there is no threat of a no-deal Brexit. The European Council are going to give an announcement tomorrow on an extension. We hope that's till the 31st of January. When we've secured that position of safety, we should be having an election as quickly as possible. The opposition parties have got to show leadership. We need to do this. We should be bringing forward a motion of no confidence where we can defeat this government and put this issue back to the people. That's the right thing to do. The withdrawal agreement bill is a bad deal. It's worse than Theresa May's deal. It'll be bad for jobs in Scotland. The last thing we should be doing is debating that. That bill is going nowhere. What we need to have is a general election from the position of safety, from having had the extension to the Article 50 process.
Times are immensely splintered at the moment. Splintered within parties, splintered within Parliament, splintered within the country. How could you, or can you envisage having pacts with other parties to bring this through to what you...
Yes, I can, and I would appeal to Jeremy, to Joe, to all the others. Let's come together. This is a dangerous Prime Minister. It's a Prime Minister that's shown that he's been willing to act in an unlawful way. He's playing with Parliament. He doesn't sign letters to the European Council. He's now trying to come up with this convoluted strategy of bringing forward a bill and then having an election right in the pre-Christmas period. We need to stop him.
Problem is he knows he's going to win.
I'm not sure that's the case. I think all of us have got to accept our responsibilities. There is no such thing as a good Brexit, and I know that the people of Scotland will support the SNP in the message that we don't want Scotland being dragged out of Europe, and we want to make sure that in our case that we've got the right to determine our own future. Opposition parties elsewhere have got to do their job in defeating this Prime Minister. We'll do our job in Scotland.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much for talking to us. Well, now I've also been speaking with the Labour MP, Stella Creasy. I asked her how she thought her Labour colleagues would vote next week on whether to hold another general election.
We're not going to support this motion on Monday because it's another piece of political theatre. It's the Prime Minister trying to do everything and anything he can to avoid actually having to look at the Brexit deal he's proposing and people being able to scrutinise it.
So is it absolute that it cannot take place on the 12th of December, this election?
Well, I can't see how it does if the motion doesn't go through on Monday, and I can't see why we'd support it, because it doesn't take no deal off the table. And I think what everyone's really concerned about is until you actually have legislation to replace the fact that we, in theory, will leave the European Union on Thursday, the 31st of October, whether that be because you have a second referendum, which is what I'd like, because I think the public need to have a say on this, or whether you have a Brexit deal, then having a general election just makes that more likely, and voting for a general election makes that more likely. So the same logic that made us say, no, hang on, this isn't a good idea before, is still in place.
There was a rumour that the leadership of the Labour Party might be tempted to try an election on the 12th of December.
I think if you go in there, as I do every single day now, and you see what this government is and how chaotic it is and how erratic it is, and you see all the issues they're ignoring. I've got big challenges with poverty, with knife crime, with schools in my local community. I'd much rather be working on that. But fundamentally, if we don't deal with Brexit, we can't deal with any of those things either. That's the problem.
Are you sure Jeremy Corbyn isn't entertaining the possibility of an election on the 12th of December?
Oh, I think you have to look at the proposals. I'm sure he is. But we were very clear tonight. There's a really good reason you don't vote for it, because it doesn't take no deal off the table.
And are you prepared to fight to keep 5.5 months, are you prepared to fight to keep January the 31st as the end of this?
We have to see what Europe comes back with, but I think they probably are going to look at some date in January next year. That's, after all, what they were required to ask for through the Benn Act. I think the challenge for us as parliamentarians is that we do need to deal with the fact that our legislation says on Thursday we crash out of the European Union without a deal. So we are going to need to make progress on that. We also need to work out how we're going to solve Brexit, because the truth is Parliament is divided, the country is divided. We're so far away from where we were in 2016. That's why I just think now we need to know what the public think.
Stella Creasy, Labour MP. Now with me is the Conservative MP Charles Walker, who is Vice Chair of the influential Tory 1922 Committee of Backbench Tory MPs. Sir Charles, where are we tonight? Do you really feel that you can win this?
Well, I'm hoping we're getting nearer a general election, but that remains to be seen what happens on Monday, whether the Labour Party...
But you must have heard enough tonight to know that Labour MPs are all saying they won't be doing it. You've got the Liberal Democrats, you've got Scottish Nationalists. It doesn't look very probable.
Well, let's hope Jeremy Corbyn has some authority in his party. I mean, here is a man who said he wants a general election. He's been saying that almost every week since June 2017. Now he's been asked twice, he's been offered a general election twice, and he's refused it. Perhaps at the third time of asking, he will accept it. After all, his front bench were out today and yesterday evening to say that if a general election was offered, they would accept it on this occasion.
But what is the biggest priority? To get the biggest decision the United Kingdom has made possibly since the Second World War right, or to have a general election?
Well, I think we have a general election and then we get that decision right. I mean, I think this Parliament has failed miserably over the past 2.5 years to make decisions. I think that's the problem. I'm not confident that if this bill goes before the House again, it won't just see that as an opportunity to delay and then ask for another extension. They'll say, well, it's Christmas now, we're not going to get this done by the 31st of January, let's push it out now till April. I don't trust the makeup of the House of Commons to come to a decision on this anytime soon. It hasn't done in the past 2+ years, and I don't think it will do in the next 3 months.
Well, wiser heads than mine are saying tonight there's little prospect of a general election. You're never going to get the numbers because of the Parliament Act.
Oh, I'm an optimist. Often the outcome's the same whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, but an optimist has more fun getting there. So over the weekend I'm going to hope that Labour does the right thing. I'm going to remain optimistic and actually gives this country the general election that it craves. And I do believe now there is an appetite out there for a general election, so we can have some...
But the word from our political editor is that Mr Corbyn has indeed decided he does not want an election.
Well, I don't know. I've not spoken to Mr Corbyn. He does decide different things depending on what hour of the day it is. So this morning he wanted a general election, I'm being told, this afternoon. This evening he doesn't. Perhaps tomorrow morning he'll decide he does, and then changes mind 3 or 4 more times before we get to Monday evening. This is not a man who is decisive in his decision-making.
You're a very experienced MP. I mean, are you really happy with the state of affairs? This is an absolute shambles.
It is a shambles.
And the leadership is also pretty questionable.
No, at least Boris Johnson is trying to get something done. I mean, I'm a very angry member of Parliament. I'm a very cross
lots
member
of words,
of Parliament.
but I don't know how much is actually
He's
being
actually
done.
tried, well, he got a deal before the House of Commons, didn't he? People said he couldn't renegotiate the deal, and he did. We need a general election. We need a majority government to take this country forward, to settle Brexit and start governing again. I mean, the Labour Party, it just seems to just want to get in the way. Jeremy Corbyn says he wants a deal. He's voted against an EU deal now at 5 times of asking. Why on earth does anybody think at the 6th time of asking he's going to support a deal. He simply isn't. The only deal he said he'd go for is one that he negotiated with the EU, but then he'd come back and campaign against it. So he doesn't even want his own deal, for crying out loud.
Well, you never know. There might be some extraordinary moment in history when the Labour Party suddenly win the election, and then you really would be in a mess.
Well, I don't think really the British public are going to put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. I advise them, if they're thinking about it, to read the resignation letter of Dame Louise Ellman. I think that might just focus their thinking.
I mean, really, we had Ian Blackford on. I mean, his constituency would be virtually in darkness on the 12th of December. It gets dark at 3 in the afternoon. It's dark until 9:30 in the morning. I mean,
it's called winter,
yes.
And we do have by-elections.
Yeah, but
in
we
the
have
winter.
a lot of old people who want to vote, and possibly most of your best supporters.
And we have postal voting. Really, to argue against a general election because it's going to be winter doesn't carry a great deal of weight, to be perfectly
However, you know
honest.
better than I do that the central argument is that it frustrates finding the right deal for Brexit.
Well, as I've said, that for Jeremy Corbyn there isn't a right deal, because even if he said he negotiated a deal, he'd then campaign against his own deal.